So yeah, because it's such a broad project, I decided to just take one strand of it, which is to look at natural resource regulation in British West Africa from 1880 to 1930. Quite a long a period of time. And maybe yeah, I just brought in this figure, this image here. That's the Sankofa bed, which comes from Ghana. And the symbolism here is that we refuse to look forward until we look backwards to see where we've come from. So an emphasis on the importance of history, knowing where you're coming from in order to determine what is it that has got you to where you are and where it can possibly lead you to. So yes, just in case, this is called the Sankofa bed. You mentioned that in Ghana, everybody has a sense of understanding of what it is. So with this image, I thought maybe I might just give a Pan-African scope to the project. Anyway, so yeah, I start with background. The historian Paul Kennedy present in his book The Parliament of Man comes up with a very very comprehensive historical discussion of the evolution of the growth of the United Nations coming out of the collapse of the League of Nations. And he largely, in many ways, attributes that to economic factors. Think about the fact that they say, yeah, fascism and all these new Nazi ideologies, they had the real beautiful ideological appeals, but they were able to sprout and grow under the seedbed of economic despair, much of which was directly related to economic conditions and the kind of protectionist measures and the troubles that arose during the period, the decades leading up to the World War II. And as the project background rightly discusses, Nazi Germany and Mussolini's hit Italy and parts of Japan, they consider themselves to be the economic have-nots and were willing to, mount an assault on the prevailing international orthodoxy in order to stake their own claims. So that provides a very good legitimating background to explain the international conditions, the prevailing international institutional structure that gave rise to the sort of issues that this project is really looking at. And I found another quote, statement that you attribute in the project that is attributed to Darin Acemoglu and James Robinson. They talk about the importance of having very good institutions, inclusive institutions, democratic values, good corporate governance. I just call it Jeffersonian, just not exactly Jefferson, but I like that expression. For natural resource producing countries to be able to share the real benefits of the resources, make it felt by all the citizens, then it's important to have such very good so-called Jeffersonian institutional structures in place. But again, I came across. I want to contrast that with Francis Fukuyama in his book. He presents the political decay. He presents a very detailed historical account of the evolution of institutions. Today, we like to look at institutions and just take them for granted without understanding the historical factors that went into shaping the evolution of how these institutions have come about. But along the line, Fukuyama has been very charitable in acknowledging that, modern institutions, though as good as they cannot simply be transferred to other societies without reference to existing rules and the political forces supporting them. So I see some really good contrast here, between where we currently stand and the historical depth. Yes, it's good, like Acemoglu and Robinson talk about, you need to have institutions. But Fukuyama says, well, we just can't pick the institutions. We need to know how did these institutions become what they are. So I find that as a very good premise upon which to launch a departure for this project. And with that broad background, I am particularly interested. I've looked at it. I found that yes, Pillar 2 and Pillar 3 fit into the kind of issues that I've discussed in my background, the international scope and the domestic scope. So the role of how nations regulate resources and how that has determined how they succeed or not. So I like the hypothesis, the hypothetical paradigm that says those actors that succeed in building robust value chains will prosper while those who do not fail. So that means there's an internal dimension and an external dimension. So which I find Pillar 2 and 3 dealing with it very appropriately. So I would just love to express my thoughts and how I feel I can possibly contribute towards the goals of the project. Yeah, I look at a paradox here based on the background. I'd like to get back to the background again. Say here in deference to Norway, we all look at Norway. Everybody would love to see what is it that has made Norway such a great success story in turning its resource wealth into broad-based, inclusive economic benefits for all of its citizenry. So clearly, you would want to have a Norway situation. And I remember very well when Ghana started its own commercial production of oil in 2009. We look to no other place than to Norway for a paradigm, to a guide to help us all develop the institutional and political institutional mechanisms to ensure that the resources, the oil wealth, is properly regulated, to avoid the sort of traps that have befallen our neighbors like Nigeria, which has become famous for one of the major poster childs of the oil curse syndrome. In the same way, we would also want to avoid the sort of traps that other neighboring countries like Sierra Leone, with the crisis of Sierra Leone's diamonds in the Civil War, as reflected in the famous Hollywood movie, The Blood Diamonds. So ultimately, we want to look at how do we create Norway in Ghana? But before we get to how do we create Norway in Ghana, how did Norway become what it is? But up until then, before the oil, we try to look at Norway for oil, for a model in terms of oil regulation, regulating the oil industry. We just cannot ignore the fact that we've had a very long historical time span in terms of resources within that region. What were the regulation, the mechanisms that were in place all this while up until oil coming in. I think I can understand why oil is a sensitive issue, because oil is a political resource. The others may not entirely be, but oil is a political resource given the geopolitical undertones behind oil production, distribution, and access, and all of that. So one of the paradox that I also see along here is that if you don't have the right institutional mechanisms domestically and externally, there are two possible likely outcomes. If you don't get a Norway situation, we have a possible outcome. You can talk about resource producing countries often would have to look at it. Another outcome would be the kind of the Chavismo approach to resource access and distribution. Hugo Chavez's modern 20th modern socialist approach to resource distribution. What is he doing with his petrol as a geopolitical weapon? In the same way, we can see it in the same way with Putin's petro nationalism. And in my view, I try to see both situations as in both Chavismo and the petro nationalism that Putin and the Russian state is famous for, as a reflection of the kind of global institutional system that is at play. It might be viewed as a response or a reaction to the sort of system that is at play. So both that provides a sense of the external approach, and we can look down at Norway's case as the model that we see in the internal spectrum. And within that, I see also the third point in particular is very relevant for me. I see a triangulating effect, a link between, the access to resources, how they're mobilized and how they're contested. And each of that, if you look at it, both examples that I've given, Norway, Venezuela's Chavismo, and Putin's petro-nationalism, both can find space in there within that triangulating system. And at the heart of it all is the question of institutions and how they are regulated.